Hey guys, you're listening to the Energy of the Untamed Heart podcast, where we talk about uncaging your divinely gifted wild heart to be as free and expansive as you were born to be. My goal is to use our stories, guest interviews, and your questions to tease out what has been keeping your wild heart under wraps. I'm your host, Mielle Fox, and together we will shatter the myths of our old stories to set our wild heart free. So thanks for choosing you and showing up today. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Energy the Untamed Heart podcast. I am your host, Mielle Fox, and my guest today is Mr. Zach Tidwell. Zach is a Marine Corps vet, and he's been out for a few years, and shortly after he came back to civilian life took a little bit of a turn, and he decided he didn't want to stay on Earth any longer, tried to kill himself, and that didn't complete the job, but he did come out of it with loss of sight and deafness in one ear. And that didn't hold him down either, because he is also a self-taught, award-winning software design and developer, and is probably more active and athletic than I could ever possibly hope to be in this lifetime. He skis, he rock climbs, does whitewater kayaking. I have a very funny story about that, Zach. And also competes in jiu-jitsu. So I'm like, holy Hannah banana. Like, for those of us who don't have any form of physical impairment or challenges, the things that you do, I mean, that's just off the charts. So I want to welcome you to the show. I want to thank you for your service to this country. And then I will do my very best to be diplomatic, because I have some really kind of deep, dark, let's go there questions if you're open and willing for that. And I would love for our guests to meet you, our guests, listen to me, our listeners to meet you as our guest this week on the podcast, because it's just, you just amaze me. I just got to say that. You just plain old amaze me. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. And we're good to go wherever. I'm intentionally very open about this stuff so that, the idea is that hopefully this keeps someone else from going down that same path. And so you can ask me whatever.
Perfect. I love it. So one of the questions I have, so I'm a little older than you. I'm probably not old enough to be a grandma, but I'm probably old enough to be your mama.
Okay.
So my parents were from Europe, and my parents were in World War II, and then they came from Europe to America to start their family, blah, da, da, da. What I didn't understand or realize as a child is that both of my parents came here with quite a bit of trauma and burdens and difficulty, not only because they went through a very hard time in history, but also they experienced war, World War II, and everything that goes along with it. And in my world, nobody talked about anything. Nobody brought it to the table. There wasn't a conversation about what did it mean and how did it feel, and these are the things that bring me worry or concern. What did come through for us as kids, I grew up in what we today call a really dysfunctional upbringing, which, now that I'm in my 60s, I can now look back and say, oh, these were two humans who experienced tremendous, tremendous trauma through their experience and didn't know what to do or how to deal with it and didn't have the tools in the toolbox. So they buried themselves in a variety of addictions, anything from alcohol to gambling to, excessive this and excessive that. You pick it, it's there. And I don't think those things have gone away despite the number of wars that we've had since World War II all over the world. But I do think that the conversations are a little bit more available to be spoken publicly than they used to be. And I'm curious if you find that to be so or not so much.
That's definitely still the case. And I think that's people, right? Our default response to these things is to just try and hold them in and shut down, whether it's war. I mean, I'm not a combat vet, so I don't even know what that's like. But you see that there these issues that span across our population are all a byproduct of it's more comfortable to stuff this stuff down and not talk about it. But at the same time, doing that in the long run takes a bigger toll. And so people seem to be more aware of it. I don't know if more people are putting that into practice and realizing that you do have to address this stuff. But that's part of the reason that I talk about this is that's what ultimately caught up with me is I wasn't talking about the things that were getting at me. And I tried to self-medicate with alcohol instead. And I wound up shooting myself in the face. So I think that's still just a societal issue just because that is our kind of default as humans because it does at the onset or the front side, I would say onset's probably not the right word there, but on the front side of that equation is in the short term, it is easier and more comfortable to just try and ignore this stuff and suppress it. But that is what leads to these addictions. You're trying to escape from those things or mental illness that comes on from not dealing with these things and the effects really multiplying and starting to take a larger toll on people.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely so. And I think with the advent of the increase in our technology, of course, we now hear and see more than what I think was visually or socially or in the newspapers or the television or whatever. When I was a kid, realize I'm pre World Wide Web, I'm pre cell phone, I'm prehistoric. Let me just leave it at that. And so I think these things did go on, but I don't think they were as mainstreamly available for other people to know about as they are now, which is good in its own way. I mean, not it's good it's happening, but it's good that there's more spotlighting going on. But this
It
is
was
where
more
I
taboo
struggle.
too,
Yes.
which it still
So
kind of is.
I think it really is. And this is one of the next questions I want to ask you is, okay, I am so grateful for individuals who feel the call to enter the military and serve for this country. I'm a first generation American. My parents were not American. I was raised over here and in Europe, so I kind of have a little bit of both. But I'm a super defiant personality. I don't like to be told what to do. So, as much as I was super respectful that my parents served, and I think they kind of had to at the time, it wasn't really an option. And they each went in for different reasons. One was to run away from home, and the other was that's what you were going to do, period. But, I had the luxury, dare I say, that I wasn't forced to make a choice in that way. And I also know my personality well enough that I probably would have gotten in quite a bit of trouble because I'm just not a very compliant gal, shall we say. But that being said, I see for people who get that call to serve, they have a quality of their personality that I think they need to have in order to show up, in order to execute the job, the task, the plan, the whatever has to be done. But yet that same quality almost is a little bit of the undoing when the task is done with. So I don't know if I'm really saying that as clearly as I want to say. So, for example, I have read through your bio, I have heard your story, I kind of troll along and see what you're up to. And I'm thinking, man, this kid, he's some freaking ass resilient. Like, he's tough as nails. There's a lot going on. And however, you have to have that when you're going to be doing things like I'm serving in the military, I'm going to war, I'm saving lives, I'm trying to save my ass, whatever that is. And then you come home and here you are in day to day society here in America, and the things that you needed to kind of turn on like a light switch to stay in the zone and to stay alive and do the job are those same things that actually can be the undoing once you're not in the field, so to speak. And I'm curious if you feel, not for everybody, but when our military personnel come home or are back to civilian, and I live in a rural community where National Guard here is a big deal, and we have a lot of folks that are involved in that, and we have a lot of people who do go in the military. And invariably, when I ask them when they come home, so how you doing getting back to day? The answers shock me, shock me. And they shock me not because of the difficulties, because that I can completely understand how that could be difficult. What shocks me is the lack of availability of services. That's the piece I'm really struggling with. And that's the piece I'm curious how you feel about this or what your take is on this.
There was a lot there, and I think different things that were addressed. So I guess on the front end, I couldn't tell like you mentioned, you're more of a defiant personality. Or with that, were you giving me background or were you kind of asking? Because it seemed, so I guess with that, I think, as you mentioned, there's like different kinds of people there. I think part of that is having feeling that call to service. It is that purpose that is larger than you and something that you are willing to ultimately die for because no one likes being told what to do, especially not in the way the Marine Corps does it. Like that's you have to swallow your pride there and realize that you're going to become part of the larger whole with that. But with in terms of like you mentioned, I'm resilient. I obviously had a lapse of judgment when I shot myself. And this is something that I talk about. I think it's really a by the time that you reach the point where you believe that the only way out is to kill yourself, you've obviously surpassed the point of rational thinking and you are no longer in a sane state of mind. But I think coming back to when you see how I've adapted since, because this has been a choice to adapt. I could have either finished the job or could be living at home with my parents still or in a nursing home or in any number of places where I wasn't independent or doing any of these things that I do. That was a choice. So that was there already. I think that was shaped part of that through an upbringing, and then part of that through the military because to succeed and excel, like I was a machine gunner in the Marines. I excelled in that environment. That is a miserable, stressful environment to be in. And I think that really shaped me and helps kind of drive those things home. And so it is weird because there's this dichotomy where you have the grit to make it through anything. You just don't necessarily have the right tools to do that in a healthy way. So, and again, I'm not a combat vet. I deployed twice and thankfully did not see war. But for me personally, I got out of the Marines and knowing like, all right, I've made it through so much and I can make it through anything. Realizing that the way I had done that was through just gritting my teeth and biting down on my mouth guard and just getting through whatever it was and just kind of like bulling a china shop through it. What I didn't realize is how that unhealthy that is and how that serves you well in that environment, but does not serve you well in a civilian environment. I think that's where people get in trouble when they get out of the military. It's that mixed with your identity and purpose is gone and kind of you're floundering in a world where you had a huge system, maybe not a support system in the way that we think of it in terms of mental health, like people to talk to, because that environment is not one where you speak up about things that are bothering you. That is definitely one where you shove those things down and shut up and suck it up. And that's necessary in that environment to an extent. I'd say that's almost entirely necessary in that environment, though there does need to be room to speak up about the mental health component when the job is done. And I think so I think that's what catches up with people. And then when you come home, I don't even like that I said that way because again, I didn't go to war. But getting out and having it's hard because the VA does have so many services available to people, but getting access to them is definitely a challenge. And I've had great experiences for with the VA through their specialty care stuff, like the blind rehab stuff, or with mental health stuff, or trying to get treatment. I was about to say trying to get treatment for substance abuse was a good experience. It definitely could be better. And even I self-admitted to the VA once when I was suicidal after having lost my sight. And that was a horrible experience inside of there. So there's definitely room for improvement, but it's hard because there's such a wide breadth of services that the VA has, but it's very, very hard to get your foot in the door with stuff, even when you're rated and have all of these benefits to you. Like the wait lists are super long, or it's hard to get a hold of humans, and it's impossible to get a hold of people sometimes. And it is such a big bureaucracy that it kind of falls, I guess, unfortunately, as like it's a stereotype of what a large bureaucracy is and the problems that come with that. And so it is tough because the services are there. It's just actually being able to utilize them because there are, you've got people in your way, whether it's understaffing or people just not doing their jobs, and also kind of gatekeepers there that are, pissed off people at a desk who ultimately have your fate in their hands on if they're gonna, send your file one way or the other, just depending on how they feel one day. And I think that's where a lot of this frustration comes from that you're talking about, and that there's it's hard because the VA has definitely improved over the stereotypes, or not the stereotypes, over its reputation that it accrued over like the Vietnam era and things like that. But it still has a lot of room to be better. And it's hard to criticize it because I also don't have good solutions for it. I have, like, I do on a small scale way that some of these systems could be better, but not how to fix the giant mess that is that organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I wasn't really offering you backstory that I'm a defiant girl. No, I am a defiant girl. I think my point was, I think my point was that, I'm definitely a gritty, resilient individual to have gone through a lot of things in my personal life that I did and have overcome. But it's a double-edged sword resilience because part of resilience means you're stuffing shit down. You're hiding behind something, you're burying it. And like you said, it catches you. It catches you at some point.
You have to pay
Um,
that toll at some point.
you
Yeah.
do. You're paying the piper one way or the other. I think the other thing that I also see, and of course, I come to you from my perspective as a woman versus like my brother, my father, like other male figures that I know who have, served and been in other positions. And let's not even talk military. Let's just talk plain old life. And I think we still have this stereotype, like the stereotype of it's not considered okay to show and then fill in the blank, to show you have some mental and wellness, to show that you're struggling, to show that you're, masking whatever's going on in your world with pick your poison, chocolate, booze, whatever the thing is for you. For some reason, when women do this, and they do it just as much as the guys do, but they're a little more vocal about it, and that's considered okay. And I really struggle with this because I'll tell you, my brother passed away in 2020, and he was a guy that stuffed it all down. That resilient as all hell, I'll say, gritty as all hell, really an amazing human, but dying inside, and it eventually caught him. It
Yeah.
did. And it's just, it shouldn't be.
It is, it's weird because I think a lot of that, like me not speaking up, I thought it was weak because I had just come from that environment where, and just, I carried just, I went into the Marines at 18. So I was definitely formed by those experiences, but I had very strong opinions coming out of that. And one of them was that speaking up was weak. And it is weird though, because like you mentioned, I think women probably are better at speaking up about it. And so with men, I think a lot of that it's not okay just comes from an internal dialogue more so than that's actually how the outside world would view it. But it's it's hard being vulnerable and speaking up, and it's not an easy thing to do. It sucks and it does it's a you're asking for help, and that always, I think people struggle with that, and that sometimes to some of us, and I say this knowingly because I've had to kind of adjust the way that I think about it. It feels weak to ask for help and to realize that you can't handle it. And I think that's probably where some of that comes from, and is like the viewing how people are going to judge it rather, or how you think people are going to judge it rather than how people actually would. Because I do, most people that I talk to about this stuff, whether it's just been in passing when I meet people and we start talking about how I lost my sight or whatever, because it does come up. I mean, it's kind of obvious something's wrong with my face. Like, I shot myself in the face. So it comes up, and most people respond to it positively, not in the sense that they're not like, oh, like not like it's a good thing that I shot myself, but in the sense that they're understanding and aren't shitty about it. I've had one-offs where people are shitty about it, but that's much, like very much so, the minority. And so I do think I don't think anyone would argue that that's not an issue that we have, but I do think a lot of that comes from, like I said, internally as opposed to how society would actually view it. And so I think these conversations like this are important because it starts to, someone might hear that and realize, like, okay, hearing other people talk about it, I can think about this more objectively now. And I think that has the potential to help a lot of people, as simple as that does seem, just having conversations about it.
I think 150%. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's the internalizing and then there's the subjectivity and the objectivity of it. And I think through the way that we speak to ourselves or the stories we choose to believe or the things that we thought we learned as kids or whatever, it creates this whole dialogue that goes on a lot until you decide, oh, guess what? I could actually change the dialogue. I could actually make a choice to not carry the story any longer. I could set this down. I could realize that to actually say, you know what? I'm one human being and I struggle like everybody else struggles, and there's no shame in that. I think there's a lot of this holding on and stuffing down that society engages in, which is kind of our demise, really. I think a lot of that comes from we're honestly giving everything away to everything outside of ourselves. And just like you said, oh, if I say I'm vulnerable, if I get out there and say, look, I had a bad moment of poor judgment and man, it wasn't a good ending, it doesn't make you weaker. It really doesn't. And I think it's very difficult because if you haven't walked somebody else's path, you haven't been in their shoes, I just don't see where you can be so judgy about what they do and don't do. And I think it takes a lot of balls, really, excuse the pun, to get out there and really tell the truth of what it is. I think to say, listen, I was in a rough spot and I was so deep in the hole that I couldn't really see a way out and I made a bad choice in a moment. I mean, honestly, I think that's how a lot of people leave this earth. They're in a bad spot, in a bad moment. They really can't see beyond that in that moment.
Yeah,
And
your perspective becomes so drawn in and tunnel visioned on
so,
what it is.
yeah,
And
all of it.
that's why I say I really buy, and I talk about this, probably an unpopular opinion, but I feel valid in saying it because I've been through it. I think there's two different populations here who both equally need help. I think that some of the reason this stuff flies under the radar is some people, when they reach that point, both populations are not in a sane state of mind. One population wants to die, and one population thinks they want to die. And so you have, like, I shot myself in the face. That was, I wanted to die. But you also have, if you, like, I've had family members who, will take pills phone in hand on the phone with someone and tell it, like, hey, I'm taking pills, and you're calling someone to tell them, and like that's a cry for help. That, yes, they think that they want to die in that moment, they truly believe that, but like they that person needs the same level of help. It's just, I think it's a different dynamic, and that's why we end up with the warning signs that are touted as being so overt that, like, hey, Miel might start talking to you about how the world would be better off without her. Or she's giving her things away or making obscure posts on Facebook. I think that's that second population, not the first. And so we have this weird misunderstanding, I think, just out of the best of intent for what's going on or how to spot these things. And I think that's a really another really dangerous thing that ties back into, like you said, like people just don't understand, and because it's such a difficult topic, and like that's probably not something a lot of people can say or really have a discussion around, even like what I just said, because you haven't been through it. And I think people are getting better about talking about it. And and I say that because I've had so many positive experiences in talking about it, but it is, it's hard when you get people on the outside who don't understand. Like you mentioned, the people who will be judgy like out of nowhere and really have no basis for it because they don't understand. It's a weird, again, another like weird dichotomy between where people are able to be objective and where they aren't. And that's another unfortunate kind of human flaw, I think, that plays into some of this stuff. But it's hard because it is at face value, it seems like such a simple problem, but it's this whole miasma of interwoven things underneath, and there's so many factors at play here that I don't know. I mean, I still don't think any of us fully understand what's going on here, other than the fact that, okay, if you've reached that place, that makes no sense because if you think about it, everything, any human or any living thing on this earth, like the whole thing, the whole purpose of the thing existing is self-preservation and passing your genes along. Killing yourself flies in the face of all that. And yes, we're humans and have more going on because our brains are a little bigger and we've got some more awareness of the world around us. But at the end of the day, like that is still kind of ties into everything that we do. And so it's just, I think being able to break it down to such a simple black and white thing like that will hopefully, or I like to think that that might make it more digestible for people who those closed-minded people who aren't able to necessarily view it from the outside perspective. But it's weird. It's also very strange. I think my sample size is probably, or my sample data is a little skewed given the fact of this is part of my story, so it comes up a lot. And whether it's me speaking or doing podcasts or doing my own podcast, like it does come up a lot. I think probably because people feel comfortable opening up to me about it because I've been through the substance abuse and the suicide stuff and depression. But it seems like most people have either dealt with substance abuse and suicide either directly or indirectly, like way more often than not. Like I think both are way more prevalent problems than we realize. But I say that again with the asterisk that like I realize probably comes up more for me because that is part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, understandably so, absolutely. But I think your point is definitely valid. I think it is far more prevalent than what we actually probably want to own up to. The other thing that kind of I see is it's a little bit like it's sort of like, your best friend's, I don't know, spouse or mama or somebody has an event and passes away, and you get the people who don't know what to do, what to say. Someone's had some kind of a trauma tragedy, an event go on, and oftentimes instead of people reaching out with, I just sent food to your door so you don't have to go out and go shopping, or, we can sit in silence, or you can cry on my shoulder, or whatever. What I'm saying is some kind of a response. I think when people don't know what to do, don't know how to say, don't know how to reach out, they have a tendency to either stay quiet or withdraw. I think that's just it's like a human fear of our humanness, like, oh my God, I don't even know what to do. And it, I I understand it, but I don't understand it, because by the time somebody has sort of put these red flags out, there's no question that this red flag is big. Whether or not they'll follow through on the red flag, hard telling, not knowing. But the red flag, for them to even get to the point of let me wave a flag, that means to me it's escalated to a pretty significant level that
Yeah.
something's not right here. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I just
it's
I
just
don't
hard.
I think that's what and I probably didn't communicate that very clearly because I realized as I was saying that I was like, where was I going with this in the first place? I think, population B, the one who thinks that they want to die, I think are the ones who make those flags. I don't think those flags come from not as much, definitely not nearly as prevalently from that first population who does. Like
Hmm.
I was intentionally hiding where I was at mentally. Like I hid
Hmm.
that. This all started for me. So my second deployment was in 2017. Found out my wife was cheating on me. Came home at the end of 2017. Tried dealing with that. It didn't work out, so I filed for divorce. And about 2 months after I filed for divorce, in March of 2018, I was in a really bad motorcycle accident. Had a really nasty concussion from it, and in telltale fashion for traumatic brain injuries, I there was a shift in my behavior. I became very agitated and very impulsive, and I also started to struggle with sleep. And actually, that was the first time that I ever experienced depression. That starts in, like I said, March of 2018. Couldn't sleep. I started drinking so I could sleep, and that eventually like accrued into an actual drinking problem. I got out of the Marines in 2018 and then shot myself in March of 2019. And it's that whole time I wasn't speaking up, and even when I got out of the Marines, I started going to school full time, started working full time. I wanted to become an ER nurse, was still keeping up appearances. As I got worse and worse into the winter of 2018 and then spring of 2019, like the only the my whole coping mechanism before that motorcycle accident was just keeping myself very, very busy. And I kept trying to do that after the motorcycle accident, but that's when I was really struggling. Whether that was the gym or like I raced in a half marathon and I had never done that, or going hiking or going to the racetrack. And in the wintertime, that was always snowboarding as a civilian. So when I came back from the Marines, like I came back to Colorado, and that winter of 2018 leading into 2019, like as I got to a worse and worse place and just became more and more apathetic and was withdrawing from things, I was still trying to make myself get out just for some semblance of sanity. And like I would gather all my gear up, drive a couple hours up to the mountains to go snowboarding just to try and force myself out of the house, and then get there and still be like, man, I don't want to be here. And so I would sit in my truck for a couple hours before I drove home so that it looked like I went snowboarding. I did the same thing in the spring with my dirt bike and going to the racetrack. I'd load all my gear up, pay to get into the racetrack, drive to the racetrack, get there, don't want to be there. And I would sit in my truck so that still came home, 4 hours later, and it looked like I'd gone. And to the extent where on March 27th of 2019 is when I had decided I was going to kill myself. It was the first time I'd ever mishandled a firearm, and I held my gun to my head. March 30th, my parents were at my apartment with my two younger sisters in that very same room where I had just decided that a couple days beforehand, and I didn't say shit. The next day when I shot myself, and so I was sober the night that I decided I was going to kill myself. I wasn't not sober the night that I killed myself, which I think is also unfortunately a role that probably plays a part in a lot of suicides. But I had started drinking for some liquid courage and thought I thought it was more personal to make a video explaining myself to my family than writing a note. And that was the first time that I ever actually opened up about the place that I was in. But my roommate came home early from work while I was recording that. I paused the video, went out into the kitchen and talked to him like nothing was wrong, and then went back in my room and shot myself a couple minutes later. I hid that up to the final minutes before I shot myself. I had all these opportunities to speak up, and I think that's why we hear these stories, and that's even like my parents struggled with this for a long time, and especially they started to do better as I did better after I started to adjust to being blind and started doing more and more of the things that I do now. Like no one understood what the fuck went wrong. like, and it leaves people reeling in the wake of this. Like, what did I miss? What could I have done? And there wasn't anything because I was hiding it. And that
Right.
comes back to me. And that's where I say that I think there's that branch between the two, because yes, those overt red flags do happen and those need to be addressed because that is a person who needs that same level of help. I make that point to say that I think that is why a lot of the time that you hear people are like, I had no idea. No one knew. No one knew anything was going on. They were this outwardly happy person that had all these things going on. And that's because there's that other population that will hide it because they don't want to be stopped. And that's why I try and talk about that, because I think we get that because it's not a more positive outlook on it, but it's nicer to think that we have that the outsiders having agency in preventing this stuff is so easy to grasp like that. And I don't think it is. And so I think the caveat to that is where intervening with people who are trying to hide it more, I think there probably still are signs. Like for me, it was obvious my behavior had changed and I was drinking a lot. That wasn't like that. The drinking wasn't hidden. I was definitely a functional alcoholic. People knew that. And that's me saying this isn't saying that like these people should have noticed. This is just me saying, because that ultimately falls back on me. I didn't speak up. I was the one who was choosing to drink. I'm the one who pulled the trigger. There's no blame on anyone else here. But people who knew me, even looking back and see it, like, okay, there were some issues here. And I think speaking to what you said with people when they don't necessarily know what to do, I think in those periods when if you have a friend or and you're noticing these changes in their behavior, you need to move past the superficial asking how are you doing that we do just culturally. That's how we do when you meet someone for the first time, like, hey, how are you? And like, but we don't really mean it when we ask it. And so I think we have a habit of also not opening up when people ask it, even when they do mean it on a different level than that. But you need to ask direct questions. They're like, hey, Zach, man, you've been drinking a lot. This is not like you. I'm worried about you because of that and this. Notice you've been very, very short with me lately and you're drinking a lot. Like, I'm worried about you. What's going on? Why? What has made that change? What can I do to help, kind of thing, as opposed to just being like, hey, are you doing all right? Because people don't open up to that. And again, that agency is still on that person to speak up. But I think that opens the door a little bit more for people who are in that position where they're like, well, I feel like, oh, I feel weak. I feel like me saying something here is weak.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. When I think about my brother's situation, I talk to him 3 times a week on the phone. We're on opposite sides of the country, but I called him 3 times a week. Hey, tell me about your day. What are you working on? Blah, blah, blah. Just sometimes wasn't really that I needed to know he was pulling asbestos out of his roof, to be honest. But what
Uh,
I knew was I could hear in his voice what was his day like. I could hear by what he wasn't saying, what he was saying. Even being that tuned in, I will tell you, after he passed and we had to go to the house and get all his things cleared out and take care of things, I was beyond dumbfounded with what I came across. There was nothing in our conversations that remotely would have made me prepared for what I walked into. And that was a big wake up call to me of sometimes what people say or don't say speaks volumes. And granted, it was on him just like it was on you.
yeah,
If you don't do the ask, okay. You can't fix somebody else. That's all there is to that. As much as you might love them, you cannot fix them. They've
unfortunately, yeah.
No, they've got to be at a place where they're like, I want to make a change, or I'm willing to make a change, or I need help to make a change, or whatever the thing is. And I think the reason I'm sharing this piece of the story on my side is just that you think you know somebody. My brother and I were about, not quite 5 years apart, and very, 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 very close. And yet, clearly, there were a lot of things that I was not privy to. A lot. And when I became privy to those things, I did probably what a lot of your friends and family and, why didn't I see it sooner? Why didn't I know? What could I have done
Yeah,
differently? Well, here at the end of the day, it's not that we don't love and we don't care, but at the end of the day, if you as that individual push people away and say, no, I'm good, no, I'm fine, no, no, whatever the thing is, or I don't want to talk about it, or whatever, there is a place where you can't force somebody. You can't. It's tragic. You don't want a
it's on
bad
them.
outcome, but it is on them.
Yeah.
So that being said, what would you suggest? And I realize, of course, I have listened to some of your other guest episodes on other podcasts, and you're very fortunate in that you have a very supportive family. But let's say that isn't necessarily your wheelhouse. How might you suggest to somebody what would be a way for them to start to reach out, to start to obviously it's on that person to make that choice, but what other avenues could you offer or suggest to help someone who's in that space of, oh man, I know I need to talk. I know I need to something. Now what?
Yeah, I've called the suicide hotline before. It was, I still think the darkest depression that I went through was probably after I was blind. I really struggled late 2020 into the first several months of 2021. And I think that's probably the worst depression I ever went through because I was actually sober. But during that, actually after that period when I reignited my alcoholism that I didn't realize that I had, I reached a low point and it was, I'm pretty sure this was leading into before I self-admitted to the VA, but I've called the suicide hotline before and just once, but the people on the other end of the phone were very very helpful. And because I'm a veteran, they connected me with mental health services at the VA. I would imagine for civilians, they do the same thing on the civilian side. They got me the help that I needed. They made sure I was okay, that I had follow-ups. Like the VA proactively reached out to me as a byproduct of these volunteers on the other side of the phone reaching out to them. But in terms of, I mean, the biggest thing, man, you have to speak up. It doesn't matter who it is to. It doesn't have to be a therapist. I'll take a step back. It does matter who it's to. It needs to be someone that you trust because you're going to be very vulnerable and you need to, obviously, that's not going to happen if you don't trust them. But the biggest thing is you have to speak up. We've kind of danced around this here, but the only person who can help you is you ultimately. If no one knows that you're struggling, no one else can help you. There are people who out there who want to help you and will help you. And I promise you, this place that you're in can and will get better, but you have to do the work. That is the caveat with that is there is work to be done and you will have to show up and do it, but you can get out of this. And so speak up to someone in your immediate circle who can help you. There's the suicide hotline, which is 988 in the United States. And once you have that initial, if you are in crisis mode, obviously the biggest thing there is to get rid of the end the crisis and get it back to a point where, okay, I'm not in a good spot, but this I can address this. This is no longer a panic. I mean, again, if you don't have a therapist that you can reach out to, you need to speak up to someone. But for me, a huge component in this has been talk therapy. And yes, I do have the VA, but mental health help and counseling is getting more and more approachable in the sense that it's becoming more and more affordable because you're having these large organizations like BetterHelp that are coming online and more kind of like democratizing counseling and therapy. And for me, I've tried a bunch of different modalities of treatment, both for some of the behavioral stuff and also because of the substance abuse stuff. And because they diagnosed me with major depressive disorder after the fact, after I shot myself, they were like, hey, there's obviously something going on here. I don't normally say that because I don't like when people lean on diagnoses, and I definitely don't. I don't normally mention that because I think people start to use that as a crutch and an excuse for not dealing with things. But, you know, whatever the modality is, for me personally, the biggest thing has been talking about things, and it's not always, it has, yes, I've had a therapist because I've had access to it through the VA, but even, I've come to, even like me getting sober, a lot of that, all of that actually was just, it was a combination of me speaking with friends and then holding myself accountable. But like in talking about things, because I did have to process all this stuff that I was struggling with that led to me shooting myself after I shot myself and was now blind and deaf in one ear and all this other stuff. Speaking up about it, whether that is to a therapist or someone that you trust, helps, because we do this thing when we're having conversations with people and we don't normally realize it, but to some extent, you're viewing, or somewhere in the back of your mind thinking about how the person that you're speaking to is going to perceive what you're saying. In a lot of, I think, these circles that we get into mental health wise, where we're really ruminating on things and stuck on something and struggling with it, I think a lot of that comes from our own internal voice getting added to whatever mess is going on there. And so in externalizing that, because then you're viewing it, even in the slightest, from someone else's perspective, that's helped me be a lot more objective with things. And as I started to learn like real healthy coping skills where I don't have to talk about everything now, but I think that is such a huge piece that people miss out on, especially when we do say like, okay, well, I don't have access to therapy. Like, well, you still, again, that comes back to, you have to speak up. I don't care who it's to. That's the simplest way forward outside of addressing the crisis, if there is one, right? Like that's something professionals need to handle. But the rest of that can be work that you're doing on your own if you don't have access to that other stuff. And unfortunately, I mean, if you don't have a support system, that's something that you have to work to develop. I mean, and again, I am very fortunate that I have a family that has that. I realize all people don't have that. And so establishing that, if you don't have that socially, is not an easy task, but I would find something that you can get involved in your community, and you will. Like for me, the role that I get all of that social support from is, or where I've found all that, is through all these physical things that I do. And it's not places where you would expect to find that, but it's been a huge helper for me in establishing, because I am very isolated outside of my family. I think it's a byproduct of meeting people is hard anyways, but it's hard for me to meet people being blind. It's hard to meet people that you don't know are there. So I found that to be very helpful for me in establishing more of a net around me, I guess, and a support system.
Yeah. Yeah. But I hear you still at the bottom of all of this. And I do think engaging in whatever that thing is, whether it's sports or music or arts or go to the library, I mean, whatever, where there's a will, there's a way is really what I'm saying. But the choice has to come from the individual. And I just, I'm so grateful for you, because not only are you willing to share your story, which it's not an easy story to repeat over and over and over and over and over, but it's important. It's important because every time you tell it, there there's somebody who's going to hear it that's going to be impacted by it. But there's also a little bit in the retelling that each time you hear yourself giving this story, it is reinforcing the value of what has come out of it. So I don't mean to diminish the severity by any means. So I apologize if anybody's like, what the fuck? I don't mean that in any bad way. But what I mean is, even in the darkest of darkest of darkest, even in the crappiest, shittiest things that could ever happen in your whole wide world, there is always something that is of value and worth that comes out of it, even though you had to go through something pretty shitty to get there. And you're a prime example of this. You've developed and created software for people both with challenges and without challenges. I, being very tech deficient, am pretty like, whoa. I mean, working my phone can be a challenge at times for me. So kudos for you. But what I'm saying is that when I just think about this, because I'll tell you, I don't know, I've done well over 100 interviews so far on this podcast.
Jeez.
None of them get me up at night. None of them wake me up. None of them have been like, oh shit, except yours. I kid you
Why?
not, Zach, I kid you not. I was up about 3 o'clock this morning thinking to myself, okay, so what kinds of questions do I really want to have? But at the same time, being respectful and honoring his journey. And anyhow, by about 4:30, after I like squealed around for a while thinking on all this, I finally thought to myself, well, shit, Neil, I mean, really, you got a big mouth and all you do is talk. Why don't you just plain old talk from your heart, and what needs to come out is going to come out? And I feel that that's where we're at with this. So I'm good. I'm totally good. And yes, I'll sleep tonight. It'll be okay. But I just feel like, your story is very moving. It's very hard. If I had my wand of pixie dust, I'd love to make it all go away. But at the same time, I'm like, he's bringing so much value to the world and to people who need to hear this, and people who are going to need what you're creating, and people who are just going to need to be around you, around your energy, around your positivity, around your resilience, around your perspective, everything that is you, although you don't have your sight and you don't have hearing in one side. I can't even imagine that, because I'm fortunate that I do have those senses still working at the moment. My memory's a little glitchy, but that comes with age. It just comes with age. But the value that you're bringing to me supersedes some of the hard time. I'm not saying it makes up for not being able to see and losing your hearing. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is, even in the darkest of dark, the love and compassion that you hold for serving for the greater good, you've taken it from I'm serving for my country to now I'm serving for the collective. And I'm just grateful.
Well, I don't think you need to I, like almost try and tiptoe around that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I wouldn't, none of the stuff that I'm doing would have happened if I hadn't shot myself. And honestly, I do not like, it's been March 31st. So coming up in a week here will be 6 years. I don't think about it very much. It's just normal. It's every once in a while there's frustrations where I'm like, man, if I could see right now, like, yeah, in this moment, it would make this process like okay, this would be a lot more of a direct process if I could see right now, but it's not. It's just, it is life now. And it really, as ridiculous as it does sound, which it probably doesn't sound ridiculous if you've listened to this whole conversation now, but like some very beautiful things have come out of all of it. Like you said, like there is beauty on the other side of it. But again, that's perspective. It's all perspective. I could have a shitty outlook on it. You could too, where you're like, well, fuck, like there's nothing positive to be had here, but kind of have to pick your battles and how you're going to choose to look at things. But it's been huge being able to speak about this stuff, especially I wasn't able to early on. I wasn't even able to talk about stuff with my ex-wife. I would get all sweaty talking about it. And then that was like doubly so for having shot myself, I think, because I had lost all of my independence. But between this stuff and being able to have an impact with it, the book, which, when that comes out, I think that's going to have it dives in all this stuff in a much deeper way. I think it's going to save lives.
Absolutely, it's going to
And
save lives.
that that feels good. Again, like something has come out of this where I say this all the time. I'm like the cancer warning on a pack of cigarettes. Like but that feels good. And then this software development stuff is absolutely not something I ever would have done. I was a machine gunner in the Marines. Then I wanted to become an ER nurse, and that's what I was going to school for when I got out. And then found out you can't do that blind. So I started going for clinical psychology, and then software development came along that path where I saw how inaccessible the world was, like the digital world was for people with disabilities, and in the context of the specialized software that we have to use to access digital things, whether that be someone who's totally blind, someone who's low vision, or someone with a spinal cord injury who has to use their voice to control things. And I wanted to become part of the solution. And so I have, and taught myself how to do all that. And now this is what I do. And it's like something that I get great purpose out of. I seriously, up until 5 minutes before we were supposed to start this, I totally lost track of time. I'd been plugging away on that stuff for about 7 hours this morning and was just in the zone. I almost like had my calendar event not come up, I would have missed this interview. And it's something I get so much purpose out of it. And it just, it's been so cool, as ridiculous as that sounds, how life has turned out on the other side of this. It really is. I'm
Yeah.
very, very happy and I feel fulfilled.
Yeah. And it's very interesting to me. We'll just go just a tiny bit cosmic before we jump off. I know you're like, oh dear God, just a little bit. But if there's no way that you could have written out the steps to get to where you are today, right? Like there's no way if somebody had said, okay, Zach, you don't get to know all this, but sit down and write a timeline, like what's going to happen in this year and this year and this year and this year, and where are you going to be in 2025? There's no way that you would have written these little steps out and it would have looked the way that it's played out. That being said, I really feel like we are all here, each of us, in whatever weirdo way, however that shows up, in some line of purpose for something bigger than us. That's I mean, I kind of feel like, well, what the hell? If you went to the trouble to like dump me here on Earth, it better be for some damn good reason. Because really, if this is it, are you kidding me? So I really there's a piece of me, the piece that is like, there's gotta be more than just this. So when I think about that and I think about the amazing things that some of the people that I interview have experienced, gone through, created, and offered so willingly and openly to the world, it reaffirms my belief that we're all here as very unique, special, gifted individuals for one giant communal cause, if you want to call it that, in whatever way we fit into the puzzle. Whether that's let me help uplift people who are challenged by digital, great. Let me help uplift people who need to hear the message over and over again, great. Whatever that thing is and however one shows up, I really feel there's no, that's not happenstance.
Well,
I just
I just had somebody on my podcast who like totally, because I've always, when people say that, or whether it's, saying it in the way that you just did, or where it's like, okay, well, I get a lot from people like, well, okay, you were obviously meant to go on and do something greater. And I always had like a weird feeling about that because of the way I thought about it, where it's like, okay, well, if there's a purpose, then why does this happen? Or you think that with like, okay, well, if there's a meaning for things, like how come my sister was born with Down syndrome or whatever, like how come
yeah.
that had to happen to
Yeah, yeah,
her?
yeah.
But I had this guy's name is Tony Lynch, just very interesting dude that I spoke with on my podcast, and he was talking about part of his story is he had an interaction with what he believes was God. He said it never said that it was God, but he believes it was God. But he basically had that conversation where, he was fighting back against what it was telling him. And he said he could literally hear this, like we hear each other right now. But, because he's he's been shot 22 times. He's wound up homeless a number of times using gangs, lost his son, all sorts of like, dude's been through a lot of hard stuff, but he's having this conversation with this entity that he believes was God. And he basically gave that argument of like, okay, well, like, all right, well, what about why'd I end up homeless? Or how come I was molested as a kid? Or how come you took my son from you? And like when he's talking about his son, he's like, oh, you thought that's about you. Like, and that has sat with me since he said that, where I'm like, God, that's a way I've never thought about it like that. But like people we do,
Yes.
myself included, tend to think about it like, okay, well, in relation to me, that doesn't make sense. So that doesn't make sense. And it's
Correct.
just now it's been like food for thought since that conversation. I'm like, okay, I need to start looking at things a little differently. So I think there might be something to what you just said.
I
It's wild to think.
It is wild to think, but here's the piece that keeps me thinking this way is, can we be curious to see if there's another way? Like, is this all there is? Is there another possibility? That's like one train of thought that I always am like, well, does it have to be like this? Does it have to look like this? Does it have to present like this? Or is this just my perspective in this moment that this is the way something needs to show up? Great. The other thing that I think about is when people go, well, if it's all about whatever you want to call it, God, universe, spirit, why did they take Fluffy from me? Why does my sibling have XYZ, whatever it is? And at the end of the day, I think the way I would best attempt to word it is we're all here for this greater whatever this is. And that doesn't equal it's going to be a smooth or easy ride. And it doesn't equal there won't be hardships. And it doesn't equal that it happens to Mr. Smith, but not to Mrs. Smith. There is capacity for this outcome. However, as a human, there is free will and choice to every moment that we exist on the earth. Some of it's a little out of your control as a kid. You can't help that part. And there's some things that there's nothing we can do about that,
But
but
you can still choose how you view
you
it
can
in
choose how you
retrospect or
view it. You
process
can
it and what you
choose
do
how
with
you
it.
process. You can choose how you respond. Those pieces of free will and choice, I think, are the things that shape the experience, that shape the trajectory, that shape. I mean, it's a little bit like I I'm sure you've heard of this, the 1 degree. If you're whatever, flying a plane, sailing a boat, driving a car, I don't care what you're doing, and you alter that by 1 degree, you're going to end up in a completely different location. Truthfully, if you keep 1 degree and you're going somewhere else. And so it's the same thing with each of these choices that we come across in our lifetime. You choose this path, you choose that path, you make this choice, you make that choice, whatever that is, that alters that pathway of how do you get to that ultimate, whatever that destination might be for us. So that's why when I say, gee, Zach, if somebody hands you a piece of paper, do you think you'd actually write the steps down the way they happened? Of course not.
No,
Of
because it
course not,
sounds
right?
ridiculous. Yeah.
Of course not. When I look at my life and I'm like, there's no way in frickin' hell I could have imagined that I would be where I am now, doing what I do now, existing day to day the way I am now, had you had this conversation with me, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. But I think that's the thing about free will choice and staying open and curious and being able to be receptive to possibility. Like, how could you have shifted yourself to say, oh, look at me, I'm going to go make this cool software that's going to help a bajillion people down the road? That's amazing. It was, here's this thing, here's this opportunity. Let me be open to receive what might happen if I were to actually entertain that idea. Oh, hey, look at this. Turns out I actually kind of like this. It's my groove. Great. So I think there's a little piece here, as much as you're like, please don't go spiritual on me, you know, I just feel like there's definitely something beyond just here, is all I'm really saying. And it's up to us to decide, do we want to believe it? Do we want to engage with it? Do we want to, live with our head in the sand? Do we want to reach out and realize that, guess what? We're really all connected. Hello. And therefore, if that's the case, ask for the help. Reach out. Nobody, I don't know who came up with this great idea, like you got to do it all alone. Who the fuck came up with that story?
It is a
I,
weird idea. If you stop and think
right?
about like it is absurd that we think that way, but we totally do.
We totally do. But if you really break it down and go, is that true? Like, hello? Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait for your book to come out. Give us a little bit of info, like where can people follow you? Where can they get your podcast? Where can they eventually get your book? Like, tell us all the things.
Yeah, I currently have a handful of people ripping the book apart because I wrote two drafts of it and then finally was like, okay, I need some external input here to structurally to figure out what I need to cut or where I need to expand. So I gave that, I'm hoping to hear back from those people here soon and then make one more pass at the book on like the commonly identified friction points and then try and get it published. So the best way to keep up with me on that front on my website, zachtidwell.net, I have a mailing list. I don't actually send out emails on there. It is just to keep people up to date with when the book comes out. Because I mean, there's a bunch of people, I get asked this a lot. So, there's several hundred people signed up on there waiting just for updates for when I have on the book. I might start using that for the podcast, but I haven't decided yet. But either way, it's not a spam list. So go sign up there. Also, if you Google me, you will find me on whatever social media platform. I think there's enough of me out there now that I kind of come up all over the place. And then my podcast is called Going in Blind with Zach Tidwell, and it is available everywhere. So it's it's just a play on words. It's not blindness related. I'm basically in sharing my own story, and over the past couple of years, I've gotten to meet a ton of incredible people, and it opened my eyes to how common these incredible stories are and how many people there are out there with incredible stories. And I just wanted to talk to people that do. So whether it's speaking with Tony Lynch, who I just mentioned, who has now left me with something that keeps me up at night, or entrepreneurs or thought leaders and researchers, I'm really following my curiosity in hopes that I'm leaving people long form conversations that they can learn from in whatever capacity. So I release new episodes every Monday and on the first Friday of the month as well.
I think it's fabulous, and I think you're making an impact. It's absolutely that ripple effect thing. It's just going to be huge. It's you're making a big imprint here, and definitely going to be leaving a legacy for sure. And I thank you. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your dedication, your honesty, your openness, your willingness to go down the hard questions, all of it. It's just this has been a really, really, really thought-provoking, heart-provoking convo. And I just thank you so much.
Yeah,
So good.
as dark as it all was, I really enjoyed this. This was awesome. So thank you so much.
Yeah, really good. So with that, I'm going to put everything in the show notes. Hang tight, don't jump off just yet because I'm going to hit the stop record.
Okay.
But I'll get everything, I'll put it in the show notes, and I'll get everything rock and roll and ready to go.